Before we begin, everyone watching, please be aware, what you're about to hear is just for learning and fun. This is exactly what was said in the federal courtroom as reported by Inner City Press during the ongoing trial of Sean Diddy Combs. If you believe that everyone who does something wrong should be held responsible, no matter who they're related to, please help us share this important story by subscribing to our channel and watching this video to make sure these important events get the attention they need. Nobody expected that Janice Combs would come into the federal courthouse that morning carrying papers that would completely change how her son's criminal trial was going. The courtroom was already full of tension from weeks of terrible stories from many people who spoke up. But the moment Sean Combs' own mother walked up to the stand where witnesses speak, everything in the trial moved into a new, never-before-seen place. It was called amazing for a federal criminal trial. Until that moment, Janice Combs had always been a strong supporter of her son through all his legal problems. She had gone to court meetings often, always said in public that he was a good person, and used her big influence in the entertainment world to help his defense. However, something had truly changed in how she saw the evidence shown during the trial. Maybe it was how all the victims told their stories, one after another. Maybe it was the huge amount of papers and proof that federal lawyers had shown. Maybe it was her realization that a mother's loyalty couldn't make it okay to keep letting bad things happen that had hurt many innocent people. She wasn't walking up to the witness stand as Janice Combs, the supportive mother. She was not there as the important person in the entertainment industry who had helped build a business empire. She was there as a witness who had very important information about the money and how the business worked for many decades. Her choice to speak up showed a deep moment where she chose what was right, putting fairness and being held responsible ahead of family loyalty and her own feelings. The meaning of what she said went much further than just how it immediately affected Sean Combs' defense plan. Janice Combs knew a lot about how the businesses worked, how money was moved around, and how everything was set up that had helped what federal lawyers called a complete criminal organization. Her helping the federal police meant a big crack in the walls that had protected the most important people. People watching realized they were seeing a moment that would likely be remembered as a very important one in federal efforts to catch smart criminal organizations that pretended to be real businesses. The emotional and tricky things that happened when a mother spoke against her son in a federal criminal trial created new situations that made people think differently about family loyalty and being held responsible by the law. Sean Combs looked very shaken as his mother walked up to the witness stand. His calm way of acting, which he had kept up through weeks of tough stories, started to show signs of big stress as he faced the truth that his most important support was about to give proof that could make sure he was found guilty and put in federal prison for a long time. No matter how much money or legal help they had, the federal courthouse morning session started with the usual steps that had been part of weeks of complicated talks in the Sean Combs criminal trial. Legal teams had their usual talks before the session, while news people got their cameras ready for another day of full coverage. These news people were always there during the trial. But the feeling in the room changed a lot when court officers said that Janice Combs had arrived and asked to talk to the court about her possible testimony. No one expected her to show up, which immediately confused the legal teams. Federal lawyers looked surprised but were ready to let her speak, while defense lawyers had urgent talks about what her speaking might mean. Sean Combs' reaction to his mother's unexpected appearance was clear right away to people watching in the courtroom. His calm way of acting, which he had kept up until then, began showing clear signs of stress as he realized that the family support he had relied on during his legal problems might be broken. His legal team surrounded him. Combs herself looked amazingly calm, even though it was a huge decision for her to speak in a federal criminal trial against her son. Her calm way of acting suggested she had thought a lot and carefully considered the right and wrong parts and legal effects of her choice. She walked with the dignity of someone making one of the hardest decisions any parent could make, but she seemed completely determined, even with the clear emotional difficulties involved. Court artists worked quickly to draw the never-before-seen family drama happening in the federal criminal trial. Legal experts in the courtroom immediately realized that they were seeing testimony that would likely set new rules for how family members might be used as witnesses in complicated criminal organization cases. Federal lawyers approached this unexpected family situation carefully. Their questions were made carefully to get important information while respecting the amazing emotional situation around a mother's testimony in a criminal case. The team of lawyers for the government seemed to know that Janice Combs' testimony could give very important details about how things were set up and how things were done that had been hard to find out from other witnesses before. The defense team's response showed they were completely unprepared for this. Their plan had apparently thought that family would keep supporting him and had not thought that close family members might help the federal lawyers. They didn't have enough time or warning about what she would talk about. The judge kept strict control over the rules, understanding the amazing family situation involved in the case. How a judge handles a mother's testimony in a criminal case needs a careful balance between making sure all evidence is shown and being sensitive to family relationships. The court's way of doing things showed that they knew this testimony was a never-before-seen situation that needed rules to be used flexibly instead of strictly. People watching in court noticed that the emotional feeling in the courtroom had reached levels higher than even the toughest testimony sessions before. The mix of family betrayal, being responsible for crimes, and federal prosecution created strong emotional reactions that affected not only the people directly involved, but also lawyers, news reporters, and the public who understood the historical importance of what was happening. The careful way the federal lawyers went after Sean Combs had apparently convinced his mother that family loyalty could not make it okay to keep supporting criminal behavior that had hurt many innocent people. Her choice to speak represented a moral choice that put fairness and being held responsible ahead of traditional family duties and personal feelings. Combs began her testimony by giving the federal court a full background about her role in the business empire that her son had built over many decades. Her point of view offered special insights into how real business operations turned into what federal lawyers called complicated criminal organization setups. Her testimony showed that she had stayed very involved in business decisions and how things were run throughout the development of Sean Combs' entertainment industry empire. According to Janice Combs' testimony, her involvement in her son's business operations started during the early parts of his career when real entertainment industry activities needed family support and money help. She explained that her first role had been limited to normal family business support jobs, including helping with office work, money management advice, and connecting with people in the entertainment world where her personal relationships could help new businesses grow. However, Janice testified that over time her role had changed to include more complicated business jobs as the organization grew and developed more and more complex ways of working. She explained that her involvement had slowly grown to include watching over money, making decisions about hiring people, and making big plans that gave her a full understanding of how the organization worked and how business was done. But her testimony showed that Janice Combs had at first seen the increasingly complicated business operations as a natural step in building a successful entertainment industry business. She explained that the complex ways money was handled, the many people needed, and the complicated ways of working had seemed normal for the size and reach of real businesses in the entertainment industry. According to her testimony, her growing worries about certain business practices had developed slowly as she saw activities and decisions that seemed wrong for real business operations. She described seeing decisions about people that seemed to put loyalty and following rules ahead of professional skills, money arrangements that seemed made to hide things rather than make real business work easier, and ways of doing things that focused on secrecy and control instead of being open and efficient. Janice testified that her attempts to bring up concerns about these business practices had always been ignored or changed by her son and other leaders in the organization. She explained that her questions about specific money arrangements, rules about people, and ways of working had been called misunderstandings of complex business requirements rather than real worries about possibly problematic activities. Her testimony showed that Janice Combs had slowly realized that her continued involvement in business operations was helping activities that she found morally wrong. She described a slow awakening to how the organization's activities were systematic and seemed designed to help control and manipulate rather than be real business. Her growing understanding of these systematic patterns had created a fight inside her between family loyalty and doing what was right. According to Janice's testimony, specific things had happened that forced her to face the criminal nature of certain things the organization did. She described seeing people being told to do things that seemed illegal, watching money deals that seemed made to help criminal behavior, and learning about systematic papers that suggested criminal organization operations rather than real business activities. Janice explained that her decision to start writing down what she saw had been because she realized that family relationships couldn't make it okay to keep helping criminal behavior. She testified that she had carefully kept records, messages, and papers that showed how real business operations turned into criminal organization activities. This documentation had been kept despite big personal risks and emotional difficulties that came with gathering evidence against her own son. Her testimony showed that Janice Combs had tried many times to convince her son to change business practices that she believed were criminal. She described tough talks where she had expressed worries about legal dangers, moral issues, and possible consequences for family members and business partners who might be affected by criminal prosecution efforts. These conversations had apparently been unsuccessful in changing how the organization behaved or operated. According to her testimony, Janice had slowly realized that just one family member talking was not enough to deal with systematic criminal behavior that had become a deep part of the organization's culture and way of working. She explained that the complex nature of the criminal organization required systematic police intervention and full legal accountability rather than internal family pressure or moral persuasion. Janice testified that her decision to cooperate with federal law enforcement had been because she understood that staying silent would make her part of ongoing criminal behavior that was harming innocent people. She explained that a mother's loyalty couldn't make it okay to let vulnerable people be hurt systematically, especially when she had information that could help prevent future criminal activity and make sure people were held responsible for past criminal behavior. Her testimony showed that Janice Combs had kept a lot of papers about business operations, financial arrangements, and organizational activities throughout her involvement in the enterprise. This documentation included financial records, communications, operational procedures, and personnel information that provided comprehensive evidence of criminal enterprise, operations, and individual criminal activities. According to her testimony, Janice had provided this documentation to federal investigators after careful consideration of the moral and legal implications of her cooperation with law enforcement efforts. She explained that her decision had been influenced by the testimony of victims who had been harmed by the criminal enterprise and by her realization that her continued silence was enabling ongoing criminal behavior. Janice concluded this section of her testimony by explaining that her cooperation with federal prosecution efforts represented a moral decision that prioritized justice and accountability over family loyalty and personal considerations. She testified that a mother's love required her to ensure that her son faced appropriate consequences for criminal behavior rather than continued enablement of activities that harmed innocent individuals and violated fundamental moral and legal principles. The emotional impact of this testimony was evident throughout the courtroom, particularly in Sean Combs himself, whose visible distress had intensified as his mother systematically presented evidence of his criminal behavior and her decision to prioritize justice over family loyalty. She explained that business accounting practices had been deliberately structured to make it difficult for external auditors or law enforcement investigators to tell the difference between legitimate business income and criminal proceeds. The financial records that Janice presented to the court included banking information from multiple places, showing that the money laundering operations had international scope and involved sophisticated understanding of financial rules and how much enforcement could do. These records showed that a lot of money had been moved through complex networks of business entities, overseas accounts, and real investment ways to hide their criminal origins. Janice testified that her son had kept a lot of papers about these financial operations because he understood that detailed record-keeping was necessary for effective money laundering and for keeping control over complex financial networks. However, this systematic documentation had also created comprehensive evidence of criminal financial activity that could be used to prove criminal organization operations and individual criminal behavior. The second major revelation involved communications that Janice had preserved, showing her son's direct involvement in planning and coordinating criminal activities that demonstrated his personal participation in criminal enterprise operations rather than simple organizational oversight or indirect involvement. The communications revealed detailed planning of criminal activities, coordination with criminal associates. Her son had maintained direct operational control over the criminal enterprise. The communications showed that he had been personally involved in recruiting victims, planning criminal activities, coordinating with criminal associates, and managing the systematic documentation that had been used to maintain control over victims and criminal organization members. The communications also revealed that Sean Combs had maintained extensive knowledge of legal risks associated with his criminal activities and had consulted with legal advisors about methods for minimizing prosecution risks while continuing criminal operations. These communications demonstrated that he knew he was guilty, and the third major revelation involved comprehensive documentation of victim recruitment and control operations that her son had maintained throughout his criminal enterprise activities. This documentation included detailed information about individual victims, systematic records of criminal activities involving specific individuals, and ways to prevent resistance or escape. The victim documentation revealed that criminal enterprise operations had been far more extensive and, according to Janice's testimony, the documentation included information about dozens of individual victims over multiple decades, demonstrating that criminal activities had been ongoing and systematic rather than isolated incidents or temporary criminal behavior. The documentation also revealed sophisticated ways. Janice testified that her son had studied and systematically used psychological techniques designed to break down victim resistance. According to Janice's testimony, the victim documentation had been maintained because her son believed that comprehensive information about victims was necessary for maintaining control and preventing resistance or law enforcement cooperation. However, the documentation involving specific individuals could be used. The fourth major revelation involved evidence of corruption and obstruction of justice activities that Janice had observed throughout her involvement in the organization. She testified that her son had maintained systematic efforts to bribe law enforcement officials with financial payments, provision of services, and systematic efforts to compromise officials through involvement in criminal activities. Janice testified that the corruption and obstruction documentation revealed extensive networks of corrupt officials who had provided protection for criminal enterprise operations over multiple decades. The systematic nature of these corruption efforts demonstrated that her son had understood that criminal enterprise operations required protection from law enforcement and judicial systems to continue effectively over extended periods. According to her testimony, the corruption documentation also revealed systematic efforts to obstruct justice through scaring witnesses, messing with legal proceedings, and working with corrupt officials to minimize prosecution risks. These obstruction efforts had been complete and systematic rather than just reactions to investigations. Janice concluded this section of her testimony by explaining that the complete nature of the documentation she had preserved demonstrated that her son's criminal activities had been systematic, extensive, and ongoing rather than isolated incidents or temporary criminal behavior. She testified that the evidence revealed sophisticated criminal enterprise operations that had caused substantial harm to numerous innocent individuals over multiple decades. The presentation of this documentary evidence had a devastating impact on Sean Combs, whose emotional state continued to get worse as his mother systematically presented evidence of his criminal behavior. His visible distress had become increasingly apparent throughout her testimony, and legal observers noted that his emotional reactions were ruining any remaining effectiveness of his defense strategy. The defense team appeared completely unprepared for the scope and specificity of the evidence that Janice was presenting. Their attempts to question her were notably ineffective, suggesting that they had not anticipated the comprehensive nature of the documentation that she had preserved or the depth of her knowledge about criminal enterprise operations. Prosecutors appeared highly satisfied with the impact of Janice's testimony on their overall case strategy. Legal experts recognized that maternal testimony providing comprehensive documentary evidence represented an unprecedented development in federal criminal enterprise prosecutions and would likely establish important precedents for future cases involving sophisticated criminal organizations operating within legitimate business structures. Janice Combs continued her devastating testimony by providing the federal court with detailed analysis of the sophisticated control mechanisms that her son had developed and systematically implemented throughout his criminal enterprise operations. Her unique perspective as both family member and business organization participant had given her comprehensive understanding of how systematic control had been established and maintained over multiple decades of criminal activities. According to Janice's testimony, the control system had evolved gradually from legitimate business management practices into sophisticated criminal enterprise operations designed to maintain absolute authority over organization members, business associates, and criminal activity participants. She explained that her son had systematically studied and implemented psychological manipulation techniques, financial control mechanisms, and dependence on organizational leadership. Janice testified that financial control represented the foundation of the entire criminal enterprise control system. Her son had systematically structured business relationships, employment arrangements, and financial dependencies in ways that made resistance or escape extremely difficult for individuals who became involved in organization activities. These financial control mechanisms had been disguised as legitimate business practices while actually serving to trap individuals within criminal enterprise operations. The financial control system, as Janice described it, involved comprehensive management of individual finances for organization members and criminal activity participants. Bank accounts, credit arrangements, real estate ownership, and major financial decisions all created complete economic dependence on organizational leadership approval and support. According to her testimony, the financial control had been supported by systematic legal manipulation that made it extremely difficult for individuals to challenge organizational authority through normal legal channels. Business contracts, employment agreements, and financial arrangements had been structured by sophisticated legal advisors who understood legal action. Janice testified that social isolation had been another crucial component of the comprehensive control system that her son had implemented throughout his criminal enterprise operations. Organization members and criminal activity participants had been systematically separated from independent support networks, including family relationships, personal friendships, and professional associations that might encourage resistance to organizational control or provide assistance for escape attempts. The social isolation process, according to Janice's testimony, had been implemented gradually and had often been presented as career development opportunities or lifestyle enhancement rather than deliberate isolation strategies. Individuals had been encouraged to relocate to properties controlled by the organization, to travel extensively on organization business that prevented maintenance of local relationships, and to focus exclusively on organization activities that eliminated time and energy for independent social relationships. Janice explained that psychological manipulation had been systematically employed to reinforce control and eliminate independent thinking among organization members and criminal activity participants. Her son had studied and implemented sophisticated psychological techniques designed to break down individual self-confidence, create dependency relationships, and eliminate resistance to organizational authority and criminal activity participation. The psychological manipulation techniques, as Janice described them, had included systematic alternation between praise and criticism designed to create emotional instability, artificial crisis creation, that required organizational intervention to resolve and comprehensive gaslighting designed to make individuals question their own perceptions and judgments about organizational activities and their personal circumstances. According to Janice's testimony, the control system had been supported by comprehensive surveillance operations that eliminated privacy and made resistance immediately detectable and punishable. Electronic communications had been systematically monitored, individual locations had been tracked through various technological methods, and organization members had been required to report on each other's activities and compliance with organizational rules and expectations. Janice testified that the surveillance system had involved both technological monitoring and human intelligence networks that provided comprehensive information about individual activities, communications, and relationships. The systematic nature of this surveillance had created an environment where resistance was immediately detected and where individuals understood that escape attempts would be quickly discovered and prevented through various organizational responses. The control system had also involved what Janice described as systematic substance manipulation designed to affect individual judgment and decision-making capacity. Organization members and criminal activity participants had been systematically encouraged to develop dependencies on substances provided through organizational channels that would make them more compliant and less capable of independent decision-making or resistance to organizational authority. According to her testimony, the substance manipulation had included not only illegal drugs but also prescription medications, alcohol, and other substances that could affect cognitive function and emotional stability. The systematic provision of these substances had created additional leverage for maintaining control, while also generating additional criminal proceeds through substance distribution activities. Janice explained that the entire control system had been supported by a comprehensive network of enablers who had been financially dependent on the criminal enterprise and therefore motivated to enforce compliance with organizational rules and to prevent resistance or escape attempts. These enablers had included security personnel, administrative staff, business associates, and various service providers who understood that their continued employment and financial support depended on their effectiveness in maintaining organizational control over members and participants. The enabler network, according to Janice's testimony, had been structured to ensure that no individual enabler had complete knowledge of the entire criminal enterprise operations, while ensuring that each person understood their specific responsibilities for maintaining control and preventing resistance. This compartmentalized structure had made it difficult for enablers to fully understand the criminal nature of their participation while ensuring that the control system could continue operating effectively even if individual enablers were removed or replaced. Janice testified that the systematic nature of the control mechanisms had been continuously refined and improved based on experience with different individuals and changing circumstances. Her son had treated the maintenance of control as a serious business operation that required constant attention, systematic improvement, and adaptation to new challenges and opportunities for resistance or escape. According to her testimony, the comprehensiveness of the control system had made individual resistance extremely difficult and had required systematic law enforcement intervention to effectively challenge organizational authority and criminal enterprise operations. Individual victims and organization members had been unable to effectively resist or escape without external assistance, because the control mechanisms had been designed to eliminate individual freedom and create complete dependence on organizational approval and support. Janice concluded this section of her testimony by explaining that understanding the systematic nature of the control mechanisms was essential for understanding why victims and organization members had experienced difficulty escaping and why speaking out had required extensive preparation and external support. She testified that the sophisticated nature of the control system